Welcome everyone to this episode of the Dad Designer Podcast. I'm joined today by Andrew Bly, a fellow dad and designer up in the New York City area. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat all things dad and designing.
Nice, nice. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Tell the people a little bit about who you are, where you're located, a little bit of your design background, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sweet. So yeah, Andrew Bly, kind of been in and around the design world for a couple decades now. I had a little bit more of a meandering journey to graphic design than I thought when I started out. I went to architecture school, um, kind of worked in that field for about 5 or 6 years before landing a gig in New York at an ad agency where I kind of made my way up through studio into like art director role and then just slowly moved further and further into actual design and branding, which I've been in for kind of the last 7, 8 years. And so, yeah, just outside of New York, lived in the city for almost 8 years, I guess. 3 years ago, moved outside of the city to Port Washington, New York, where I've been running my own little studio branding design service for the last few years. And yeah, have an almost 4-year-old and try to do all things design and dadding with the 24 hours a day that I have.
Nice, nice. So you're out of the agency world now, doing your own thing.
Yeah, I think I was lucky that like I guess about 2 years before the pandemic hit, I was started freelancing and then picking up a couple of my own clients. So I was used to the like work from home life, which I've just lucky enough to stay in it. I think especially being a dad now, it's like the amount of time that I get with my daughter, dropping her off, picking her up, like just even just subtracting a commute in and out of the city is just so huge, and like constantly grateful for that. So really loving the independent life.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So if your daughter's almost 4, that would make her a COVID baby, would it not?
Oh yes, yeah, it was we were so she September of 2020, so we were like right in like the second wave. It was it was like touch and go that like if I was even going to be allowed in the room at that point because of the
Yeah,
hospital we were at. Like it was
right.
still like, so luckily I was allowed in the room. But yeah, wild. I feel
Yeah.
like, especially like having my wife be pregnant. She also, she went out on her own. She's a lawyer. She started her own practice early 2020 while she was pregnant.
Oh my.
So we've both been kind of running, like sprinting for, 4 years with business and life in general. So yeah, I think we've basically been through most everything and feel like we could handle most everything because of that.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you kind of went out on your own. You have a daughter. You were designing before you had her, but how do you now kind of intertwine being a dad, young daughter, probably not in school yet, and getting your design work done? Like, how do you, I'd call it balance, but like, it's really more of an intertwinedness. How do you do it
Right.
all?
Yeah, exactly. It's so she's been in like a sort of nursery school and now she'll be in that like the pre-K program they have. And so try to get like as much accomplished between the hours of 9 and 4, 9 and 5 when the schedule aligns. Which, of course, like being a designer, like there's never a stopping point, right? It's like, I'll get back to this when I put her down tonight. So yeah, it's like, it's definitely, I think, brings a lot of perspective, right? It's like, I really don't have to get to this right now. I can wait until tonight or tomorrow. And I think like just that like time management and like just trying to be as present as possible, which I know is like also impossible, especially like running your own thing or being independent. It's just always like, oh, there's an email I could reply to or this thing. It's just trying to like do that high wire act and
Yeah.
be as present as possible.
Yeah. Do you have really good discipline, or do you have like uh, app blockers and whatnot to try to help you be more present? Like, what's your trick? I still haven't got it down, so I'm curious what you do.
No, I'm terrible at that. Like yeah, no sort of app blockers. I barely ever like put my phone on like do not disturb. Like I try to to do as much as possible just on my own. It'll probably be helpful if I used something, some third party apps or something to help out in that regard, but just been winging it. Just
Yeah,
like most things, it's just winging it.
yeah, yeah, totally,
Which I
totally.
think like being a dad, like you learn that too, right? You're just like, you can only do so much reading or learning like before just being thrown into it where you're just like, anything I did read or learn is out the window. So now what do I
Yeah,
do?
yeah. And in the first, I mean, especially 4 years, but it keeps going for a little while after that. Like every season, they're the your kids develop so quickly at that age that like every season is as soon as you feel like you've got it under control, it like just changes.
Oh man, that's exactly it. I mean, I feel like every 6 months it's like a new milestone. You're like, you look it up and you're like, oh, right, they're at that 4 year, like, stage where their dinosaur brain is like forming or whatever. So the meltdowns are wild and it's going to be really challenging. Like,
Yeah,
but I feel like every 6 months is another one of those like milestones that you hit.
yeah, yeah. Totally. Well, let's jump in and talk a little bit about, first of all, how we even came into each other's sphere, and then a little bit of the work and how parenting and dadding has influenced it. But
Yeah.
I think I came across NYC Palettes, which is an Instagram handle that you started, where you would take photos in the city and then extract four colors from the photo. And at a certain point, I was like, this is super rad. And I started doing it with photos I was taking, and like posting them on Instagram stories. And in the beginning, crediting, like, hey, this idea was stolen from NYC Palettes. And you were super chill about it. But I found out there's more to the story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was probably like back in the heyday of Tumblr where, I just moved to New York. So probably like 11, yeah, about a little over 11 years ago, get a chance to work at this ad agency and no idea what I was doing, just looking for like as much creative inspiration as possible to load in. And so, yeah, I remember stumbling across a Tumblr that was like Wes Anderson color palettes, and just like thinking that was the coolest thing. And I had just always, because the agency that I worked at, I could walk to and from almost every day. And, I'm living in Little Italy, basically. I'm getting to walk to 23rd Street and work at this ad agency in New York City. Like, it was just all these dreams coming true and just like not believing it every day. So I was constantly like kind of head in the clouds, but also I would just snap photos like on my walks, like to and from. And I noticed I was like, oh man, there's so many cool color palettes like in these buildings that I'm snapping. And so because of that Tumblr, I was like, okay, let me just start making this as a thing. And it kind of blew up instantly when I started doing it. Of course, I don't think I ever had an Instagram page be above 1,000 followers, and people were loving it. Like, I got so many interviews or so many people that I worked with that like brought me in because they loved that project, which was always like really cool. They're like, oh yeah, I've seen this. Like, love what that what you're doing. And so yeah, I mean, it was really like just a cool outlet. And it was like one of those things where I remember I had a creative director at the time where I was like trying to instantly turn it into something else. It's like, oh, maybe I could make a book, like do this or that. And he was like, it doesn't have to be anything else, which like, kind of broke my brain a little bit at that point. But I was like, oh yeah, you can have a like creative outlet, and not have it be a thing,
Yeah.
which is, I think really nice and kind of a luxury, especially these days, not living in the city and like not having a ton of free time to do things like that. But yeah, definitely just like allowed me to kind of just have an outlet. I felt like I was giving back a little bit to the city, and also like I loved. There were a couple. people along the way. You were like one of them more recently, but just like that took it and like did their own thing with it, which was really cool. Um, I think I had one or two people reach out for prints that they wanted done of specific ones. And so I was always like happy to oblige, be like, yeah, of course you want like a photo I took in a frame. Yeah, let me make that for you.
Yeah,
So yeah, it was just like it opened a lot of doors. Like I think um, it got picked up by a couple of like Design Boom, I think was one, and somewhere else like Slate or somebody reached out to me like and wanted to write about it. So that was, it was just cool. I was like, junior art director at that point and wanting to do, more creative things. So yeah, that project still gets a lot of love.
that's cool. That's so cool. I love that advice too from the creative director because I'm the same way. Like I'll start a side project or a creative thing, and then immediately my mind will go into, okay, where do I spin up which site builder do I spin up the e-commerce portion of this so that people can order prints and like, and I think I had a similar creative director that was just like, dude, just do it for fun. Cool. Yeah, so that's how we met, and then I stumbled on your like greater work, which is, or like your broader work, which is like your now studio. So hey, HEYACB.com is your
Yep.
portfolio site. And there's a couple super rad projects on there. A lot of them revolving around like food or beverage, which we can jump into. But yeah, talk about some of the projects on there. And like I think what you told me in email was some of the were impacted in some way by your daughter. So yeah, weave those two stories together.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been, yeah, right before, I'd say about like 2 years before I went on my own is kind of when I made that transition more into branding and design focused. I was working in a agency that was they were half venture capital fund and then half creative agency, and so we worked with earlier stage companies and brands, and it was the first time that I saw how like a creative idea could really help the earlier stage companies, especially. And I got to work on this project that I still showcase because it gets a lot of love, and one of my favorites still is Matcha Bar, and it was just literally coming up with a new bottle and a new label for them. They're keeping the brand as is, but we kind of gave them this idea of like a mini billboard bottle of like really well written headlines on them. Like really like the tone of voice was like the selling point on that, and that really they released that at Expo West that year. A couple months later, they were having Whole Foods knock down their door to go national with it because they wanted the bottles so bad. So that was like the first one. And because of that, then I started getting, it was featured on Dieline, a couple other places. And so people were reaching out because they saw that and they were like, oh, and it just happened to be in the same sort of natural food and beverage space. So that like kind of led me down that path and been super lucky to stay in that space. A lot, like majority of my clients are, CPG brands in the natural food and beverage space. And so that led to projects like Fresh Fizz, which I know is behind me and also on my site. That came out of, there's a community called Snackshot. Big shout out to Snackshot on Instagram. Um, run by a woman, Andrea Hernandez, kind of curates like trends and just everything cool in that world that's happening in CPG. She's usually leading the conversation. And so Yoni, the founder of Fresh Fizz, reached out to me on there, was like, hey, I've got this soda, looking to like, have a designer just rebrand, think about new cans, think about new branding. Um, and I thought strategically he was doing something really cool where, a lot of these newer sodas are, adding things like prebiotics, probiotics, or using stevia or other like sugar alternatives where, the taste is kind of terrible. He was like, I'm only using 3 or 4 like real food ingredients and that's it. And so they were super delicious and like, just using real food, which I, huge proponent of. And so once I tasted them, was like, yes, let's do this. And so that one, like, I think that was one of the first projects too, where my daughter was at the point where she could like try it too. So it was like after like refreshing the brand, getting all the new packaging, like having her hold it and like drink out of it was just like so like I love that moment. I still like I really love working in packaging because of that like tactile moment of like holding things that you've worked on for so long. And so having my daughter hold it was like, just a huge, huge, emotional moment for me as a emo dad. Um, but,
Yeah.
uh, but it was just also, and with that project too, it was kind of a family affair where I had a second cousin who was my first intern, and she was at going to school at Parsons, and it was the first project that we worked on, and she actually did the word mark that ended up as the new branding.
Oh,
She
cool.
did that. She hand drew that, um, and so it was just like kind of like the universe coming together, like a little bit of a family affair.
Nice.
Wanting to help this like small organic soda brand get to the next level. So and obviously the founders, their parents, and so I feel like definite like connection with other founders in these like earlier stages that are our parents struggling through the toddler years together, which is a huge bond. So yeah,
Totally.
that
Yeah, that's cool. I know. Um, I've done some can and bottle design before, but my kids could never hold it and take pictures with it because it's not uh, kid drinks
right,
or
yeah, exactly,
adult drinks. So
yeah.
yeah, that's cool. And I have noticed, like as I was looking through your site, like both Fresh Fizz, Temple Bar, um, Fabalish a little bit. And if you want to see any of these, definitely go to his site or go watch the actual video of this versus just the audio. But the they're all kind of like an organic, hand drawn feel in many ways. Is that a particular style that you tend to lean into, or is it just like it worked for these brands and so it's part of the arsenal of tools that you have?
Yeah, I would say Fresh Fizz and Temple Bar. I guess it started probably with Temple Bar. It was I was working with them in 2019, kind of reviving this classic storied Manhattan bar, and uh, just so happened as we were working through the branding, I saw one of the original owners was an artist and had kind of a similar style to like my architecture school kind of scribbling, doodling style. And I was like, oh, that'd be kind of cool to like inject into the branding. I had never like thought of myself as an illustrator and still kind of don't, but that was the first project where it just kind of made sense and ended up working out. And there's still doodles all over the menus and napkins and a couple other pieces at that bar that I still work with to this day, updating. So after that, like some of the, I guess, like naturally just kind of grew into some of the other projects, or people reach out to me now and they're like, oh, we like this illustration style, like let's do something like that for this wine brand. But yeah, Fresh Fizz, like because of the organic nature and like everyone else in that like new soda space was kind of polished or like a little overly polished too. We were just like wanting that like more natural organic feel. So something hand drawn felt right on that. So yeah, it's just like I wouldn't say like I thought I was going towards that as like a style, but I feel like the last few years kind of naturally came into it.
Nice, nice. Um, yeah, that's it's cool. And was looking at the Fresh Fizz before and after too, and it's interesting because whoever did the original can didn't do a terrible job, right? Like I think the refresh is much better, but going from knowing some of the backstory, it's like okay, they actually did like a decent job with starting out with it. Obviously, you were able to elevate it, but it's cool to see like when something like the germ of an idea is there, and then you're able to just elevate it.
Yeah, and that was all the founder Yoni. He was just doing it on his own. He was like didn't know anything, Illustrator wise, packaging. He just was throwing stuff together, and yeah, it was super solid, and people really liked it. And it was in like the more narrow, tall can, and so we wanted to move it into like a regular, soda can size. But
Mm.
yeah, I feel like a few of my clients in the last few years haven't been total like brand refreshes like Fresh Fizz, where Fabalish, they came to me with the logo. We didn't mess with it all. It was more just like typography and color palette and rethinking the labels, which I love doing too. Like obviously being as early as possible, with some of the founders, and the branding is always great, but coming in and just giving some fresh thinking before they hit more retailers. I love those challenges too.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And you're able to like you have to strike this balance between keeping, especially in organic brands, like keeping that earthy kind of handmade feel and also elevating it. I have a friend that is working through that now. He's like, well, I still want it to feel small and like we're handmade, but I want it to be cleaner and better than it is. And so like there's this interesting balance of figuring out, okay, what do you mean by those words, and how do we get to the core of what this is?
And do you find, I think it's like that after having kids, it becomes easier to like walk through those moments with clients, or
Uh,
like,
I've never thought about that, but the number of times currently that we talk to our 7 year old to figure out what, okay, you said this, but it doesn't seem like that's what you meant. So like let's find different words to like get to the bottom of this. So yeah, it's probably I would have chalked it up to like experience chatting with clients, but it probably has something to do with kids too.
I think
Have you
so,
noticed
yeah.
that?
Yeah, I feel like I may be like far less, it might be just being in my 40s now, being a little worn down from the toddler stage, uh, where I'm a little less combative, like when it comes to feedback, but yeah, just I think like having a bit more of an understanding. And yeah, there are more times where I'm like, well, let's unpack what that really means, because I think sometimes, things can get thrown back and forth, a little too easy. But yeah, just kind of getting to the root of it. But I definitely think, having a kid has helped the just like dealing with like clients in general, but also, feedback for sure, and walking through that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um Couple questions as it relates to just being a dad. What so far has been your greatest joy as a parent?
Man, that it's so hard to like I think like being a parent, like not fall into just like every single cliche, you know. But I do think like, you know, I mean being independent is great, you know. But I think one of the like biggest joys is just being there like for drop off and pickup almost every single day. I know that that's like unusual for a lot of people, so just like being grateful for that. I think getting to see, especially in the last year, she's been like really into art and like painting, and just seeing like the work that she does at school and like the work that she does at home, like that's just been like huge for me. I'm just like, loving every minute of seeing a painting or a doodle or whatever she's like thinking through creatively, has been huge.
That's cool. All right, now the flip side. What's been your biggest parenting fail or struggle, or and you can go as personal or high level as you want.
I mean, this 3-4 phase is pretty rough, so I feel like it's pretty raw at the moment. But I just think like patience in general, it's so hard, especially when you're like, both of us, like my wife and I, like working for ourselves all day, usually stressed out. And then you've got like an overtired kid, comes home at 4 or 5 o'clock that is, just a whirlwind. So I think like just patience in general, just like trying to fight through those tantrums and through this, sort of 3-4 phase
Yeah.
with a little bit of grace and understanding. It's like, it just that's been the most challenging part for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like an overtired adult coming home from work is already enough. My tantrums are just internal instead of external.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
One last question, and it might be a little meta, but it feels like there's been a shift in dads and designers in the '90s movies versus like the the parent that celebrates pickup and drop off versus the you could have stayed in the ad agency life, which has been captured on film many times. Like, why that choice? Do you think there's a bigger cultural shift? And yeah, what's your take on that?
I think it's super cool. I mean, there's just been, especially in the design industry, like there's so many like small independent shops from, solopreneurs to like, 5, 10 person agencies that have just been, I think, more upfront and vocal about being dads or moms, which has been huge. And like, I know personally, I got to work with them on something very small, but I've always been a fan of the Young Jerks,
Mm-hmm.
um, which just like, I mean, their work is incredible. They're really awesome dudes. They're both named Dan, and they were both dads, and they just like leaned heavy into that, from an early stage of their studio and their work, and they've added, a couple more like just heavy hitter designers in the last few years. So I've always like just been impressed and like used them as inspiration of like just seeing that other like, oh, it doesn't have to be the like, going into an agency and grinding it out and like, it could be something totally different. So I feel like, yeah, there's definitely been a shift even before the pandemic, but for sure after the pandemic where people are like just trying to figure out something on their scale to get by.
Yeah, yeah. If you could only pick one person you would like to see on this show, we're going to tag them. We're going to try to get them on.
I mean, I guess in that sense, like, yeah, I would go with, well, it's hard to pick between the two Dans, but one of the Dans from Young Jerks. I
Okay.
know one of them lives in Philly,
Oh,
um, but Dan Casero, he I think lives upstate maybe or somewhere in New York. But
okay.
what you could choose one of the Dans from the Young Jerks. I think
Right.
like as like I was saying, I think they've been kind of out front of the dad designing
Yeah.
before a lot of us, but just always inspired by them.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. Well, as far as where people can find you, heyacb.com, but also at hey underscore ACB on Instagram and TikTok, at 82. Oh, sorry, Instagram and
Yeah,
threads at 82 ACB on TikTok, and then on LinkedIn as well. Hey ACB.
yeah,
Anything
probably.
else?
No, a lot of time on TikTok these days. I'll be honest.
Okay.
But
Nice.
I will say, like, especially for like dads or like parents in general, like TikTok has been huge. Just like going through these different phases and trying to find some help. TikTok has been extremely helpful for parents out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's the right form factor too, right? Short, gets to the point in the in between the moments where you're working, parenting, and trying to get some sanity.
Yeah, so if I do have screen time, I'm probably going to be on TikTok. I'll,
Nice,
still scrolling Instagram, but those are the two main places.
nice, nice. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Andrew. And yeah, I hopefully we'll get one of the Dans on in a future episode.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks so much. This is amazing. And keep on making those palettes because I'm slow with those these days.
I will. I will. Thanks, man.
All right.